The objective of this video and this lesson is to cover JavaScript concepts that otherwise get missed a lot. These are important concepts and go a long way in improving our knowledge and our capabilities of JavaScript. So some of the concepts we will cover in this video are let versus var, hoisting, default parameters, spread operator in objects, and object destructuring. So let's begin with let versus var. So we have earlier also used let and var to define a variable. So what are the differences between them and what is preferable? So the difference is largely in the scope of a variable defined. With let, variable has block scope, and with var, variable has function scope. So in the examples that we will see the difference between the block scope and the function scope, and what are the issues it creates, and why is let a preferable option. And a variable which has not been declared with let or var is treated as a global variable. So we can also use a variable without declaring it with let or var, and we will see in the examples that how it gets treated as a global variable. So let's look at these examples. So to start, normally let's define a variable, say variable x equal to 5, and let me do just a console.log x and declare another variable using let y is equal to 5 is equal to 10, say, and console.log y. If we run this code, what do we get? We get 5 and 10, which have been printed on the console. Let's suppose I change the order of it. So first I print and then I declare. So what will happen in this case? So I have done a console.log x and then I have declared var x equal to 5. Similarly, I have done a console.log y and then I have said let y is equal to 10. Now if we run this code, what do we get? So for the console.log x, I get a value of undefined. Whereas for console.log y, I get an error message at line 6, which is this line. Uncaught reference error, cannot access y before initialization. So the first thing you can notice is that there is a difference in which JavaScript has treated both of them. And why has the difference occurred? The difference has occurred because x has been declared using var and y has been declared using let. So in the case of var, the value has become undefined, so even before it encountered the declaration. Whereas in the case of let, again it has found the variable, but it is saying cannot access before initialization. If I remove this declaration for a minute and then try it, what happens? You can see I am still getting an error. So what did I do? I removed the let from here and I got uncaught reference error, y is not defined. So defining it with let is giving me the value that y is being defined, but I cannot access it before initialization. Whereas in the case of var, it becomes a undefined. It's a variable that is defined, but its value is a variable that has been declared, but its value is undefined. Let's also look at the third case. Suppose I declare z is equal to 15. Note in this case, I am not putting a let or a var. And if I do a console.log z, what happens? So I get 15. So even though I have declared this variable z, I have not declared it using var and let, I have just initialized it, it works fine. What we will learn in the next set of examples is the difference in all these three cases. So this, as we discussed, would have a function scope and we will understand it better because it's declared using var. This will have a block scope and this will become a global variable. So these three declarations and this is the difference it creates. So it's important to note this. So make a note of this, and in the next examples it will become more clear. Let's look at another example using let and var and understand their differences. Let me say I have declared a variable x equal to 10, and now I say if x is greater than 5, then what do? I say var a1 is equal to 20. Let me say let a2 is equal to 25, and I just do a console.log a1 equal to a1, and similarly a console.log a2 equal to a2. And what I'll do is I'll just do this console.log outside the for block. Let's run this code and let's see what do we get. So because the value of x is greater than 5, so it goes in. So I get a1 is equal to 20, fine. a2 is equal to 25, fine. Now notice after I come out of the block, so this is the end of the block. For a1 I get the value of a1, whereas for a2 I get a2 is not defined. So the variable which I declared with let a2 is not defined because it has block scope. So this is a block of code. Between these braces, this start brace and end brace is a block of code. So the variable that I declared with let will only exist within this block, which is why a2 is not defined here and I get this error. The variable declared with var has function scope. So all of it is running in a function, a default function in JavaScript here. So I can see a1 outside this block. So although I couldn't see the let variable, I can see the var variable, and which is why I got the value of a1. Similarly, I could have done a3 is equal to 30, and let me just do a console or dot log of a3 also. Now note a3 has not been declared with let and var, it has just been initialized. What do I get? I get an error here, so I will just comment this line because the code will not execute after that, and I get a3 is equal to 30. So a3 also I got the value, a1 also I got the value, but the variable I declared with let, because that has block scope, this is the start of the block, this is the end of the block, I could not get that value out. So what does this tell us? So let has block scope, and as we have said, var has function scope, which will become clearer as we look at it. And the variable a3, which we have not declared with let and var, we just initialized, this is gonna be a global variable. The next examples will make this more clear. So let us say we have this function hello1 in which we have declared three variables c1, c2, c3. c1 has not been given a var or a let, it's just been assigned a value. c2 has been declared using var, and c3 has been declared using let. Now outside the function, let me just call this function once, and outside the function I will just try and print their values. So console.log c1 equal to c1, and same I will do with c2 and c3. Now if I run this code, what do I get? I get c1 is equal to 10. So I get the value of c1 outside it. For c2 I get an error where c2 is equal to 12. I get an error here, c2. c2 is not defined. Let me comment it so that we can run the next line. And for c3 also I get the same error, c3 is not defined. So in this case, whether the variable c2 or c3 was declared using var or let, we could not get their values outside this function. However, this variable c1, which we did not declare with any var or let. We just assigned a value, we could see it. So why did this happen? So first thing we need to understand, var has function scope. So what does function scope mean? Outside this function, I cannot see C2. So which is why outside this function, I cannot see it. Second, we know let has block scope. Now a function is always a block of code. It could be within a function we have a block of code. So this is a block of code. So obviously outside it, I cannot see it. So a block scope is narrower or smaller than a function scope. So I cannot see C3. And we know without using let or var, if we define it this way, it's a global variable, which is why the value of C1, we could see it here. So I got C1 equal to 10. So this example makes it clearer to us that how do these three behave and what are the differences between them. Now that we have understood the differences between let and var, what is the problem it creates, or what is the issue with var and why is let preferred? So let's look at an example to understand it. So let me say var a1 is equal to 20. And now if I just do a console.log a1, I will obviously get 20. Let me now say define a for loop for let I is equal to 0, I less than 10, I plus plus. And in this what I'll do, I will just say I'll try and declare another variable where b1 is equal to 6, where a1 is equal to b1 into 10. And let me now come out of the loop and print console.log a1. So this variable a1 I had declared outside the loop. So in the loop I needed some variables, I declared them, and now I came outside it. So what should be the value of a1 when I print it here? The way we have written the code, in our expectation, it should have been 20. But if I run it, what do I get? I get 60. The variable here, this a1, the value has changed because this variable was declared outside it. Now that has created a problem when I run it, because if I use the same variable name and we could end up using it in some function, this value got changed. So I was hoping to get 20, but the value I got here was now 60. And this I could have written in a loop. I have declared a variable and I have created it, and this is a problem. If I used let here, what would have happened? So let's replace all of this by let. So I've just replaced var by let, and now if I run it, because this has block scope, so the scope of this a1 remains here. So this variable a1 remains inside it, and once I come back here, I get a1 as 20. So I have no problem that I am facing here. So it's a fairly good programming practice that we should use let. Var should be avoided as far as possible because of these unintentional errors that can creep into our code. Also be careful while using variables. So if I don't declare it, then it becomes a global variable and it again starts to create problems. So we should be fairly careful about how do we want to use them. So be careful, and as a good practice, always use let to declare a variable before you go ahead and use it. Let us move on to the next concept. The next concept is hoisting. Hoisting is a concept in JavaScript where all the declarations of variables and functions are moved to the top of the scope before code execution. So we saw something similar in let and var, wherein the variable with var was declared later, but we could get the undefined value before it. The big advantage of hoisting is for functions. And what is that advantage? That advantage is that functions can be used no matter where they are declared. So I don't need to keep an order of functions and then first define a function and then use it. I can define my function anywhere in the code and use it even before in the sequence from top to down of the code, the function has been declared. So let's look at an example and see that. So let me say in the first line of the code, I call this function hello. Now here, this is the first line, so no function has been declared. And now if I say a function hello, let me first say define a function hello1, console.log hello1. Let me now declare a function, say hello, console.log hello. Now if I run it, what will happen when I run it? I get hello. So although here when I was at this line, this function has not been declared, hello has not been declared, the declaration comes later. Because of function hoisting, I am able to use it much anywhere that I want. Now what this makes it easier to write code, so I don't need to worry whether I have declared it now or I need to below or up and remove the code. I don't need to do anything of that. I can just go ahead and use it. Similarly in hello1, if I wanted to call hello, I can just go ahead and do it. And now if I call hello1, I get hello1 and hello. So again, when this function hello1 is being called, in that code of hello is below it, but it does not matter. So this is function hoisting. It's a very nice, powerful feature that JavaScript gives us, which makes code writing much simpler. Another very powerful and intuitive feature of JavaScript is default parameters. If a function is called with missing arguments less than declared, the missing values are set to undefined. So if I have a function and that function has 3 parameters and I call it with say 2, then the third is automatically set to undefined if I used only 2. Default parameters allow function parameters to be initialized with default values if no value or undefined is supplied. So if I had 3 parameters, I gave 2, then it would give it the value undefined. But in my declaration of the function, I can also give it a default value to the third parameter, that if no value was given in the call, that should be its value. We look at a couple of examples and see why this is such a nice and a wonderful feature from JavaScript. Let us say we define a function, say add, which adds 3 numbers, say a1, a2, a3. And what does it do? It says let sum is equal to a1 plus a2 plus a3, return, or I'll just do a console.log sum. Now let me call this with say 1, 2, 3. And now if I run it, I get 6 as expected. Suppose I call this function with only 2 parameters, 1 and 2. I get a nan here. Why is that happening? Let us go ahead and do a console.log in this function a1, a2, a3. So you can see that the values are 1, 2 and undefined. So because I provided 2 parameters, the third parameter a3 got a value of undefined. If I called this function with only 1 parameter, let me say call it add 5, you can see both a2 and a3 are undefined. And if I called it say with 0 parameters, then obviously as we can now expect, all these 3 parameters have got the value undefined. So the first thing is I can actually call this function in these many ways. So because it had 3 parameters, I can call it with 3, 2, 1 and 0. Now suppose I called it with 2 parameters, add 1, 2. Now what happened there? Let me remove the rest of the code so that we can appreciate it better. It did not calculate the sum, it gave me a not a number. Why was that? Because A3 is undefined, so when I add it here, obviously it will create a not a number. So this function, this calling is not very useful. How can we make it? I could have just said A3 is equal to 0. What does that mean? That the default value of A3 is 0 if it is not passed or if I pass an undefined. So let's run it now. So now you can see in the console.log, what do I get? 1, 2 and 0. The moment it gets a 0, the sum is also become relevant. Everything has become relevant. If I just now say add 5 and run it, I get 5 undefined and 0. So this is what I get. So now if I wanted this to also work, I could have just said A2 is equal to 0. And now it gives me the sum 5. Similarly, if I wanted it, maybe there is no use to this function, but we could have defined a function like this. So default parameters help us use it in multiple ways and increase the flexibility of it, and at times we want to give default values to some parameters, it helps us do that. So this is a very, very powerful and intuitive feature from JavaScript. Note that while we are using this function, so the other things that we know about functions, which is function expressions and arrow functions, they work similarly. You can use default parameters. So if I convert this function into, say, a function expression and use arrow function, so I would say add is equal to, and I can provide exactly the same way, and this should also work. So it does not matter whether it's a function, normally it's a function expression or an arrow function, the default parameters work exactly the same way. Another very useful concept in JavaScript is spread operators in objects. So we have earlier seen the spread operator for arrays, which was used to create a copy of an array. The spread operator for objects is again used for a very similar purpose, create copies of existing objects and make a copy of an object with more properties. So if I want to inject more properties into a copy, I can use the spread operator. So let us see a couple of examples and this will become clearer. Let us say we have this object, this JSON object user1. So I can say let user2 is equal to user1. And let me just do a console.log user1 and a console.log user2. So I get both of them. Now what happened here? This will become clearer if I just after this say user2 dot name is equal to Mary. Now if I run it, what do I get? I get user1 is Jack22 and user2 is Mary and 22. So using the spread operator, we created a copy of this object user1. So now user2 is a copy and hence when I changed values in user2, no change happened in user1. Instead of making a copy, if I had just said assigned it, what would have happened? Both of them would have changed because user2 and user1 are actually the same object. So if you want to make copies, this is what we do. We would use spread operator. So it creates a copy of it. So another use case for spread operator is I can also add more fields to it, properties to it. I can say course is equal to JavaScript. Now if I run it, what do I get? I get user1 is the same, name Jack, age 22, and user2 now has Mary, age, and the course as JavaScript. So I've made a copy of this object and also injected more properties into it, and this is very easy to read and do it. I could have just created copies on my own, but that would have been very cumbersome code. So this is the use of the spread operator. It's a small, nice technique, and you will encounter it frequently in a lot of codes. Let us look at another concept, object destructuring. Object destructuring is used to extract properties from objects and bind them to variables. Advantages of object destructuring are extract multiple properties in one statement and set a default value if the property does not exist. So again, these are tools which help make the coding much simpler, easier to read and manage. And let's look at an example as to how it works. Let us say we have an object student which has these three properties: name, age, and course. So I can say let name, age, course equal to student, and if let's just go ahead and do console.not name, age, and course. If I run it, what do I get? I get the name as Jack, age as 22, and JavaScript as the course. So what we have done here in this line is referred to as object destructuring. So this object was their student and it had these fields name, age, course. So the moment we declared it like this, we have created three variables. So this is like saying let name is equal to student dot name, let age is equal to student dot age, let course equal to student dot course. So I could have done this, or the equivalent way of doing it is this way. So it's much simpler, neater code. Note that the field names here that we are using, name is the same as this, age is the same as this, and course is the same as this. The order need not be the same. So let me just delete it and change the order and show it. So I've changed the order, nothing happens. If I change the field name, say to age 1, what do I get? Age is not defined because I've used age 1. Let's make this age 1 in the console. I get undefined. Why? Because age 1 did not match anything here. So it's matching it based on this. So let me make it age, and let us say grade, the student's grade. Now if I run it, I get grade as undefined. Why? Because grade did not exist in this object. I can, while doing it, give it a default value. Let's say grade is B. So I get the grade as B. But if the grade was defined here, so let me say grade is A, and now I run it. So if it found it, it got a grade of A. Otherwise, the default value is here. So again, this is a very, very neat coding technique. And again, in a lot of codes, you would encounter it because most developers end up using these features. So it's good to know. And you should also start using all of them. So default parameters, use let, use object copies and the concepts with it, and object destructuring. So make it a practice, start using them, and you will start getting comfortable with it. So let's look at a few exercises based on the concepts we have learned in this lesson. Define a function to multiply 5 numbers. It takes 5 parameters n1, n2, n3, n4, and n5 and returns their product. Give default values to the parameters so that the same function can be used to multiply 2, 3, 4, or 5 numbers. So what do we need to do? We need to define a function, say multiply, which takes 5 parameters n1, n2, n3, n4, and n5. And what does it do? It just returns n1 into n2 into n3 into n4 into n5. I can just do console.log multiply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and let's run it. So I get 120, which is perfectly fine. Now if I want to run it with 4 parameters, let me just make it say 1, 2, 3, 4. I get not a number. Why? Because the 5th parameter is not there. So here I would have gotten an undefined. So if I just do a console.log n1, n2, n3, n4, n5. In the first case, we got 5 values. In the second case, n5 got the value undefined. So which has led to this problem. So what should we initialize this or give it a default value so that our multiplication works? So if I make it 1, then it would work because in multiplication 1 is a multiplicative identity. So now this works. Similarly, if I want to make it work with 3 parameters, then I should make n4 equal to 1, n3 equal to 1, n2 equal to 1, and now I can just check it. So this is with 3 parameters and this is with 2 parameters. So I get 6 and I get 2, which is exactly what we were looking for. So this is the power of default parameters, and it makes the use cases for our function much richer. Define a function which takes 4 parameters, target, s1, s2 and s3, and returns true if the sum of s1, s2 and s3 is greater than the target. It is known that s1, s2 and s3 will not be provided always. Give appropriate default values. So we'll define this function check, which will take these parameters target, s1, s2 and s3, and what will it do? It will check whether the sum of s1, s2, s3 is greater than the target. So we can just say let total equal to s1 plus s2 plus s3, return total is greater than target. So this should work for us, and I can just say console.log 10, 2, 5, 6. So 2 plus 5 plus 6 is 13. So this should return true, which is what I get. If I make this say 22, I'll get a false. Now we know S1, S2, S3 are not always known. So if I just run it with 2 values, this again works fine. But now you can see 2 plus 52 is 54. So now this has become a problem. Why? Because the value of total in each case became not a number. So if I just do a console.log total, it is a nan. So whether this value was 2, 5, in which case it should have returned a false, or the value was 2 and 52, in which case it should have returned a true, I am getting the same thing. So how do we solve it? We should give it a default value. What should be the default value? It should be 0. For S2 also the default value is 0. And for S1 also the default value is say 0. Now if I run it, I get a true for this and a false for the other one. So this is how we can use default values to solve this problem. Given a JSON with the fields as product, price and quantity. So we have been given a JSON with these fields. Create another JSON with product, price and quantity along with discount and final amount. So we want to create another JSON in which these two fields have also been added. If quantity is less than 8, discount is 10%, otherwise it is 15%. Use spread operator and object destructuring. So we will use spread operator to create a copy of that, and we will use object destructuring. So let us say we have this object with these three fields: product, price and quantity. So what do we want to add to the new object that we create? We want discount and final amount. For discount, we will need to check for the quantity and apply to it. So let's use object destructuring first. So I can say let price comma quantity equal to obj. So I get them in price and quantity. Now I can say quantity let discount, or let's say disc percent equal to quantity greater than 8, then it is what, 15%, otherwise it is, or let's call it 0.15, otherwise it is 0.10. So I get the discount percentage. Once I've gotten the discount percentage, what is my discount? Let discount is equal to discount percentage into price into quantity, that is my discount amount. And what is my final amount? Let final amount is equal to price into quantity minus discount. So now I have calculated both these fields. So I need to create the new object. So let me say let obj1 is equal to, I'll use the spread, get all those fields of obj here, and I can say discount is discount, and I can say final amount is final amount. Note when we are saying discount colon discount, so that's the name of the field and the value is this variable that we are using here. Similarly here, final amount is the name of the property of the field and final amount is its value. So let us now just do a console.log obj and a console.log obj1. So we want to also check whether obj got disturbed. So this is the value of obj, so it remains the same, and in obj1 we have gotten these values. Let's make them much simpler so that we can check it. Let me make it 10 and 10. So my discount is 15, my final amount is 85. If I make it 10 and 5, my discount should have been 10%, which is 5, and the final amount is 45. So what all did we use here? This is where we used object destructuring. So we just destructured the object, got these into price and quantity. We used ternary here, and then we use the spread operator to just create the new object. Given an array of JSON, each JSON has the fields name, marks1, marks2 and marks3. Create an array of JSON with each JSON having the fields name, marks1, marks2, marks3 and total marks. Note that if any of the marks is missing in the original JSON, take it to be 0. Use spread operator and object destructuring. So here we have an array of students and each JSON has these fields name, marks1, marks2, marks3. Note that not all the JSONs have all these three marks, marks1, marks2, marks3. What do we need to do? We need to create another array with new JSONs, not these JSONs, which has an additional field total marks. And if the marks were not given for any, then they should be taken as 0. So we will use map. So I can say array.map, let's say student goes to. Now what do we do here? Let's destructure the, so let marks1, marks2, marks3 equal to st. So I can now say let total marks equal to marks1 plus marks2 plus marks3, and I can say let obj equal to, I'll make a copy of st and add the field total marks and give it the value total marks, and I can just do a return obj. Let's assign it to a variable. So I can say const arr1 is equal to this, and I can just do a console.log arr1. Let's run this code. So what do we get? We get values for Mary are fine. For Bob, we get total marks as nan. Why did we get not a number here? Because marks1 is not there. So when it added it, it obviously created an issue. So what we can do is we can give them default values of 0. Now if I give them default values of 0 and run it, what happens to Bob? Bob gives me 55, which is fine. Mary gives me what we were looking for, and so all we get it. And even for Jack, because we did not have any of those fields, we get name and total marks. Let us also print the original array. We did not want that to get disturbed, so let's just run it. And you can see in the original array there is no field total marks. Why? Because we used spread and created a copy of that object. So once we created a copy of that object, this remains perfectly fine, no change to it, and we were able to construct a completely new array with these new objects. So these are some very powerful and heavily used features of JavaScript. I would suggest just go through them in detail and master these concepts.